There's a specific moment when you realize your mind has become your worst enemy. It happens differently for everyone, but the feeling is always the same. You're standing at the edge of something important, something that could change everything, and suddenly your thoughts start attacking you from every angle. What if I fail? What if they laugh? What if I'm not good enough? And before you know it, the opportunity is gone, the moment has passed, and you're left with that familiar taste of regret. You tell yourself it's because you weren't ready, but deep down you know the truth. Your mind betrayed you. It turned against you at the exact moment you needed it most. And the worst part? This isn't the first time. It happens over and over, in job interviews, in relationships, in moments when you could step forward but instead you step back. Your mind, the very tool that's supposed to help you navigate life, has become a fortress built to keep you trapped inside your comfort zone. In 1645, Miyamoto Musashi sat alone in a cave called Ryagando and wrote something that would echo through 4 centuries. He had spent his entire life turning his mind into a weapon. 61 duels to the death. 61 times he walked into a situation where one wrong thought, one moment of hesitation, one flicker of doubt would mean his life was over. And he never lost. Not once. But what most people don't understand is that Musashi's greatest battles weren't fought with a sword. They were fought inside his own skull. Every time he faced an opponent, he was simultaneously fighting an internal war against fear, against ego, against the part of his mind that wanted to freeze or run or collapse under pressure. And what he discovered in those moments of life and death combat became the foundation of something extraordinary. A system for transforming your mind from a prison into a fortress. Not a fortress that keeps you locked inside, but one that keeps chaos, doubt, and fear locked outside while you operate with perfect clarity no matter what's happening around you. The book he wrote in that cave is called The Book of 5 Rings, and it's been misunderstood for centuries. People think it's about sword fighting or military strategy, and on the surface it is. But Musashi wasn't just teaching people how to win duels. He was teaching them how to reconstruct their entire mental architecture. How to take a mind that's chaotic, scattered, and self-sabotaging, and turn it into something unbreakable. Each of the 5 rings represents a different element, a different layer of mental construction. Ground, water, fire, wind, and void. And when you understand what these rings actually mean, when you see how they fit together into a complete system, you realize that Musashi wasn't just a warrior. He was a master architect of human consciousness. He figured out how to build a mind that doesn't crack under pressure, doesn't betray you in crucial moments, and doesn't negotiate with fear. You're watching this video because your current mental fortress has holes in it. You know it does. You felt the anxiety leak through during presentations. You felt the doubt creep in when you're about to take a risk. You felt your confidence crumble when someone challenges you or when things don't go according to plan. And you've tried to fix it. You've read the books, listened to the podcasts, practiced the affirmations. You've told yourself to think positive, to visualize success, to believe in yourself. And it works for about 15 minutes. Then reality hits, pressure builds, and your mind reverts back to its default state. Chaos. Because positive thinking isn't architecture. Believing in yourself isn't construction. What Musashi understood is that you can't just wish your mind into strength. You have to build it. Deliberately. Systematically. 1 ring at a time. Before I show you exactly how to use Musashi's 5-ring system to reconstruct your mind from the ground up, I need you to do something. Subscribe to this channel and turn on that notification bell, because what I'm about to share with you isn't going to be comfortable. This isn't about feel-good motivation or quick mental hacks. This is about fundamental reconstruction. And if you're serious about that, if you're done with temporary fixes and ready for permanent transformation, then you need to be part of this community. Hit that like button right now, and then drop a comment telling me this. What's the one situation where your mind betrays you most? Is it before you speak in public? When you're about to have a difficult conversation? When you're facing a deadline? When you're alone with your thoughts at 3 in the morning? Write it down. Say, my mind betrays me most when, and finish that sentence. Because when you name the enemy, when you identify exactly where your fortress has cracks, that's when real construction can begin. Do it now. I'll see your comment, and more importantly, you'll see that hundreds of other people wrote the exact same thing. That shared recognition is the first brick in your new fortress. Let's build. The first ring is ground, and this is where most people's mental fortress collapses before it's even built. Musashi says that ground is about foundation, about understanding the terrain of your own mind before you try to construct anything on top of it. And here's what he means by that. Right now, your mind is running on infrastructure you didn't choose. It was built by your parents, your teachers, your early experiences, your failures, your trauma. You're operating on someone else's architecture, and that architecture has fatal flaws built into it. Maybe your foundation says, speaking up is dangerous, or people like me don't succeed, or if I try my best and fail, that proves I'm worthless. These aren't conscious thoughts. They're deeper than that. They're the ground your entire mental structure is built on, and until you excavate that ground and examine what's actually there, everything you build on top of it will be unstable. Musashi spent years in what he called solitary training, and what he was doing during that time was groundwork. He was examining every belief, every assumption, every inherited idea he had about himself and the world. He was asking, is this actually true, or is this just something I accepted because I was taught it before I could think critically? And then he was deliberately removing the false ground and replacing it with solid foundation. He called this process knowing the way in all things, and it's brutal work. Because you have to be willing to discover that some of the core beliefs you've built your life on are complete fiction. Maybe you've built everything on the belief that you need people to like you, or that you need to be perfect to be valuable, or that you can't trust yourself. And when you examine that belief closely, really closely, you realize it's not based on truth. It's based on one or two experiences you had when you were 8 years old that your mind then turned into a universal law. There's a guy I know, we'll call him Marcus, who spent 15 years in corporate jobs he hated because his ground was built on a belief his father installed. Real men provide stability even if it kills them. Marcus never questioned that belief. He never excavated his ground. He just kept building his life on top of it, and every year he got more miserable, more resentful, more dead inside. Then one day he had a panic attack so severe he ended up in the emergency room, and the doctor asked him a simple question. What are you so afraid of? And Marcus said, I'm afraid if I quit my job and try something different, I'll prove my father right that I'm not a real man. The doctor looked at him and said, your father's been dead for 7 years, so who exactly are you proving anything to? That question broke something open. Marcus realized he'd been building his entire mental fortress on ground that didn't belong to him, on a belief system he inherited but never examined. And once he saw that, once he excavated that false foundation, he could start building something real. The ground ring isn't about changing your thoughts. It's about going deeper than thoughts. It's about identifying the foundational beliefs that generate your thoughts automatically, and then having the courage to dismantle the ones that aren't serving you. Musashi says, if you don't know the ground you're standing on, you'll never stand firm in battle. And your battle is happening every single day, in every decision you make, every risk you avoid, every time you silence yourself or play small. You can't win those battles with a foundation full of cracks. So here's your groundwork. Take out a piece of paper right now and write down 3 beliefs about yourself that you've never questioned. Beliefs like, I'm not the kind of person who, or people like me always, or I could never because. Write them down. Then ask yourself this question. Is this belief based on actual evidence from my adult life, or is it based on something that happened years ago that I've been carrying around like it's still true? You're going to find that most of your limiting beliefs have an expiration date that passed a decade ago. But you're still operating like they're current facts. That's false ground. Excavate it. Replace it with truth. And then, and only then, can you build something that won't crumble under pressure. The second ring is water, and this is where your mind learns to move. Musashi says that water is about adaptability, about fluidity, about being able to change your shape without losing your essence. And this is critical because most people's minds are rigid. They have one way of thinking about problems, one emotional response to stress, one pattern they repeat over and over even when it stops working. That rigidity makes your mind fragile. The moment something unexpected happens, the moment your plan falls apart, your entire mental structure freezes or shatters. Water doesn't do that. Water adapts. It flows around obstacles. It changes shape to fit whatever container it's in. But it never stops being water. It never loses its essential nature. Here's what this looks like in practice. You walk into a meeting prepared to present an idea you've spent weeks developing. You've rehearsed it perfectly. You know exactly what you're going to say and how people will respond. Then 30 seconds into your presentation, your boss interrupts and says, "Actually, we're going in a completely different direction. This isn't relevant anymore." A rigid mind collapses in that moment. It goes into panic mode because the script is broken, the plan is dead, and it doesn't know what to do. But a water mind? A water mind adapts instantly. It pivots, it finds a new angle, it turns the interruption into an opportunity. It doesn't freeze because it was never attached to one specific outcome. It was fluid from the beginning. Musashi trained this quality by practicing his sword techniques in dozens of different conditions. On uneven ground, in the dark, in the rain, while exhausted, while injured, with his offhand. He deliberately destroyed his own comfort zones so that his mind would learn to operate effectively regardless of circumstances. And that's exactly what you need to do with your mental patterns. Right now, you probably have ideal conditions you need in order to perform well. You need 8 hours of sleep, a quiet environment, no distractions, everything going according to plan. And when you don't have those conditions, your performance collapses. That's a rigid mind. That's a mind that only works in one specific container. You need to train water adaptability, which means deliberately practicing your mental skills under terrible conditions. There's a woman named Sarah who used this principle to transform her entire relationship with anxiety. She was a graphic designer who could only do creative work under perfect conditions. Quiet house, morning coffee, good night's sleep, the right music playing. If any of those elements were missing, she couldn't access her creativity, and she'd spiral into anxiety about deadlines and disappointing clients. Then she read about Musashi's water principle and decided to try something radical. She started designing under the worst possible conditions she could create. Late at night when she was exhausted. In a coffee shop with screaming children. While playing music she hated. With artificial time pressure where she only gave herself 15 minutes to complete something that normally took an hour. At first, it was torture. Her brain rebelled. But after 3 weeks of this practice, something shifted. She realized her creativity wasn't actually dependent on external conditions. It was always there. She just trained herself to only access it under specific circumstances. Once she broke that pattern, once she taught her mind to flow like water regardless of the container, her anxiety dropped by 80%. Because anxiety is what happens when your mind is rigid and reality is fluid. The gap between those two things creates suffering. Here's your water training. Identify one skill or mental state you think you can only access under ideal conditions. Maybe it's confidence, creativity, focus, calmness, whatever. Then deliberately practice accessing that state under progressively worse conditions. If you think you can only be confident when you're well prepared, practice being confident while improvising. If you think you can only focus in silence, practice focusing in chaos. You're not trying to perform perfectly under these conditions. You're trying to teach your mind that it can adapt, that it can function even when the container changes. That's what makes a mind unbreakable. Not rigidity, but fluidity. Not one perfect strategy, but the ability to find a strategy for any situation. Right here, I want to pause and ask you something that matters. Because I can see thousands of people watching this video right now, but what I don't know is which ring you need most. Some of you need groundwork. You need to excavate false beliefs. Some of you need water training. You need to break rigid patterns. And some of you need what I'm about to share next, which is the most intense and most transformative ring in Musashi's entire system. So scroll down right now and tell me this. Which ring speaks to you so far, ground or water, and why? Maybe you relate to Marcus and his inherited beliefs. Maybe you relate to Sarah and her rigid dependencies. Write it in the comments. Say, I need the ground ring because, or I need the water ring because, and finish that sentence with total honesty. When you do this, 2 things happen. First, you're going to see other people who need the exact same thing, and you're going to realize you're not alone in this work. Second, you're creating a map of your own mental architecture, and that map is going to be crucial for the next 3 rings. So comment now. Tell me which ring you need and why. I read every single one, and your insight might be exactly what someone else needs to hear. Do it. I'll wait. The third ring is fire, and this is where most people discover they don't actually have a mind at all. They have a committee. A chaotic group of voices arguing with each other, contradicting each other, drowning each other out. One voice says go for it, another says it's too risky, another says you're not ready, another says you'll regret it if you don't. And you're stuck in the middle of this noise trying to make a decision while your mental energy drains away. Musashi says that fire is about intensity, focus, and the ability to direct all your mental force toward a single point without distraction or dilution. It's about turning your mind from a scattered committee into a unified weapon. When Musashi fought his most famous duel against Sasaki Kojiro, he didn't just show up and swing his sword. He spent the entire boat ride to the island doing something that looked insane to everyone watching. He was carving a wooden sword out of an oar. Not sharpening a blade, not reviewing techniques, not meditating. He was making a new weapon from scratch while traveling to a fight to the death. And what he was actually doing was training fire. He was forcing every fragment of his attention, every scattered thought, every whisper of doubt or fear, into a single focused activity. By the time he reached the island, his mind wasn't a committee anymore. It was a single point of absolute concentration. Kojiro, meanwhile, had spent the journey anxious, distracted, mentally rehearsing scenarios, imagining outcomes. His mind was scattered. The fight was over before it began, not because of technique, but because of focus. Your mind right now is probably running 12 different processes simultaneously, and you think that's normal. You're reading this while part of your brain is thinking about what you need to do later, another part is replaying something someone said to you yesterday, another part is judging whether you're understanding this correctly, another part is already planning how you'll explain this to someone else. That's not mental strength. That's mental chaos masquerading as multitasking. Fire training is about collapsing all those scattered processes into one directed beam. And the way you do that isn't through trying harder to focus. It's through eliminating every option except the one thing you've decided to focus on. There's a concept in Musashi's philosophy called cutting off the enemy's escape routes, and most people think it's about combat tactics. But what Musashi really meant is that you have to cut off your own mind's escape routes. Your mind is constantly looking for exits, for distractions, for ways to avoid intensity. It wants to check your phone, to take a break, to think about something easier, to do something less demanding. And every time you leave those escape routes open, every time you give your mind permission to scatter, you're training mental weakness. Fire training means you close every door except one. You sit down to write and you remove every distraction, every alternative, every possible escape. Not because you're trying to force yourself to focus, but because you're removing every option except focus. Your mind will fight this. It will scream for exits. It will manufacture emergencies and important thoughts and urgent reasons why you need to stop. But if you hold that single point of focus, if you refuse to give your mind any escape route, something extraordinary happens. The committee dissolves. The voices stop arguing. And what's left is pure directed force. I know a guy who used this principle to transform his career in 6 months. He was a writer who'd been working on the same book for 5 years without finishing it. He'd write a chapter, then spend 3 weeks editing it, then get a new idea and start a different chapter, then doubt everything and rewrite the beginning. His mind was a scattered mess of competing impulses. Then he learned about Musashi's fire principle and decided to try something extreme. He gave himself 30 days to finish the entire book, and during those 30 days, he cut off every single escape route his mind could use. He deleted social media from his phone. He told his friends he was unavailable. He woke up at 5 in the morning and went to a library where nobody knew him. And here's the critical part. He made a rule that he couldn't edit anything until the entire first draft was done. No going back, no rereading, no perfecting. Just forward motion. One direction. One focus. His mind went insane the first week. It screamed at him to stop, to check things, to improve earlier chapters, to take breaks. But he held the single point. And by day 30, he had a complete draft. It wasn't perfect, but it was done. Something he couldn't accomplish in 5 years of scattered effort, he accomplished in 30 days of fire focus. Here's your fire training, And it's not going to be easy. Choose one thing you've been avoiding or half doing because your mind keeps scattering. Could be a project, a conversation, a decision, anything. Then create a container of time. It doesn't have to be 30 days. It could be 3 hours, where you focus on nothing but that one thing. And during that container, you deliberately close every escape route. Phone off, door closed, no music, no breaks, no checking email, no doing anything else until the time is up or the thing is done. Your mind will panic. Let it. Your mind will try to convince you that something else is more urgent. Ignore it. You're not trying to produce perfect work. You're training fire. You're teaching your mind that when you decide to focus, there are no exits, no negotiations, no committees. Just one direction. Just one target. Just one unified force. That's how you turn your mind into a weapon instead of a weakness. The fourth ring is wind, and this is where you learn something that's going to upset you. Everything you think makes you special is actually making you weak. Musashi says that wind represents the study of other schools, other ways, other perspectives. And what he means is that most people build their entire identity around one way of doing things, one way of thinking, one set of skills. And they think that's what makes them unique. But what it actually does is make them brittle. Because the moment their one way doesn't work, the moment their identity is challenged, they collapse. Wind training is about deliberately exposing yourself to ways of thinking that contradict everything you believe, not to adopt those ways, but to understand them so completely that your own way becomes stronger through comparison. Musashi didn't just master one sword style. He studied every sword school in Japan, learned their techniques, understood their philosophy, and then adapted the best parts while discarding the weaknesses. He wasn't loyal to tradition or to one teacher's method. He was loyal to effectiveness. And that's a critical distinction most people miss. They confuse loyalty to a method with strength, but Musashi understood that loyalty to a bad method is just pride wearing a disguise. What makes you strong isn't committing to one way. What makes you strong is understanding every way so deeply that you can choose the right approach for each specific situation. Here's how this shows up in your life. You've probably built your identity around certain traits. Maybe you're the logical one, the emotional one, the creative one, the practical one. And you wear that identity like armor. You say things like, I'm just not a numbers person, or I'm not good with emotions, or I don't do creative work. And you think that's self-awareness, but it's actually self-imprisonment. You've locked yourself into one way of operating, and every time life demands something outside that one way, you fail or avoid or outsource. That's not a fortress. That's a cage. Wind training means you deliberately study the exact opposite of what you think you are. If you're logical, you study emotional intelligence. If you're creative, you study systems and processes. Not to become those things, but to understand them well enough that you can access them when you need to. There's a story about a CEO named David who built his entire career on being the aggressive, decisive, move fast and break things leader. That was his identity, his brand, his wind. And it worked phenomenally well for 15 years. His company grew, people respected him, he got results. Then his company reached a phase where aggressive decisiveness was exactly the wrong approach. They needed careful listening, slow consensus building, patient cultivation of trust. And David couldn't do it. He tried, but every cell in his body rebelled. It felt wrong, weak, not him. So he kept operating the only way he knew how, and within 18 months, his board forced him out. He lost the company he built because he only had one wind. He never studied the other approaches, never understood them deeply enough to use them when the situation demanded it. And he learned the hardest lesson in leadership. Being good at one thing and terrible at everything else doesn't make you specialized. It makes you fragile. Here's your wind training, and you're going to resist this. Identify the one trait or skill you've built your identity around. The thing you always say about yourself. Then spend the next 30 days deliberately studying and practicing the opposite. If you pride yourself on being rational and data-driven, spend 30 days learning about intuition, emotional intelligence, reading energy in rooms. If you pride yourself on being spontaneous and creative, spend 30 days studying structure, systems, planning methodologies. You're not trying to become that opposite thing. You're trying to understand it well enough that it's no longer your weakness. Because right now, whatever you've rejected about yourself, whatever you've decided isn't you, that's exactly where your fortress has holes. That's where life will attack you. And if you don't shore up those weaknesses by understanding the other wins, you'll keep getting beaten by situations that demand something you've decided you're not. The fifth ring is void, and this is where everything I've taught you so far becomes either useless or unstoppable depending on whether you understand what I'm about to say. Musashi says that void is the place beyond technique, beyond thought, beyond self. It's the space where your mind isn't constructing anything because it doesn't need to anymore. The fortress is built. And once it's built, the final step is learning how to not be in it. How to exist in the space where there's no ground, no water, no fire, no wind. Just awareness. Just presence. Just you and reality with nothing in between. This is going to sound paradoxical after everything we've built, but here's what Musashi discovered in his final years. The strongest fortress isn't the one with the thickest walls. It's the one you don't need anymore. Because as long as you're defending something, as long as your mind is occupied with maintaining your mental structure, with protecting your identity, with proving your worth, you're still at war. And war is exhausting. Void is what happens when you've done so much groundwork, so much water training, so much fire focus, so much wind study that your mind finally stops trying to be anything. It just is. And from that place of void, of empty presence, you can respond to anything without friction, without fear, without that voice asking if you're doing it right. You just move. You just act. You just exist with perfect clarity. Musashi spent his final years painting, writing poetry, creating art. Not because he stopped being a warrior, but because he'd transcended the need to prove he was one. His mind had become so unshakable that it didn't shake even in stillness. He could sit in a cave in complete silence, and his fortress was still there, invisible, unbreakable, but also unnecessary because there was nothing left to defend. This is the level most people never reach because they confuse the fortress with a goal. They think the point is to build bigger walls, stronger defenses, more sophisticated mental strategies. But that's still prison thinking. Void is when you realize the fortress was always meant to be temporary scaffolding. You build it so you can eventually exist without it. Here's what this looks like in your life. Right now, you're probably exhausted from maintaining your image, your reputation, your sense of self. You wake up every day and immediately start running mental programs. Am I good enough today? What do I need to prove? What do I need to defend? What might go wrong? And all of that is fortress maintenance. It's exhausting, and it never ends because there's always something to defend. Void training is about gradually releasing the need to defend anything. About building your ground, water, fire, and wind so solid that you can finally stop thinking about them. Stop managing them. Stop performing them. And just exist. I'll tell you what this looked like for me because this is personal. 4 years, I built my entire identity around being the person who had answers, who was always learning, always improving, always one step ahead. And that identity required constant maintenance. I had to read the right books, watch the right videos, have the right insights. And it was a prison. Then I had a moment, a breaking point really, where I realized I was so busy maintaining the fortress of being knowledgeable that I'd stopped actually experiencing anything. I was always analyzing, always extracting lessons, always turning life into content for my mental database. And one day I just stopped. I went for a walk with no purpose, no lesson to extract, no insight to capture. Just walking. And for the first time in years, my mind was quiet. Not because I forced it to be quiet, but because there was nothing left to defend. That's void. That's when the fortress becomes invisible because you've embodied it so completely you don't need to think about it anymore. Your void training isn't something you can force or practice directly. It's what emerges naturally after you've done all the other work. After you've excavated your ground and built a solid foundation. After you've trained water and learned to adapt without losing yourself. After you've practiced fire and unified your scattered attention. After you've studied wind and understood perspectives beyond your own. Once all of that is in place, void is what's left. It's the space where you're no longer becoming anything because you've already become it. where you're no longer defending anything because there's nothing left to defend, where your mind is so unshakable that it doesn't need to shake to prove it's strong. So here's what you do with everything I've shared today. You don't try to master all 5 rings at once. That's not how fortresses are built. You start with ground. You excavate the false beliefs. You identify what you're standing on and whether it's solid. Then you move to water. You practice adapting, flowing, functioning regardless of conditions. Then you train fire. You collapse your scattered attention into unified focus. Then you study wind. You learn the perspectives and skills you've rejected. And then, if you do all of that with consistency and honesty, void will find you. You won't need to seek it. It will emerge naturally as the space between everything you've built. Miyamoto Musashi died at 73 years old in that same cave where he wrote the Book of 5 Rings. And his final words, written just days before his death, were these: "I have no regrets. I have found the way." Think about that for a second. A man who spent his entire life in mortal combat, who faced death 61 times, who lived in isolation and hardship, who never had wealth or comfort or easy answers. And his final statement wasn't about what he wished he'd done differently. It was about finding the way. About building a mind so unshakable that even death couldn't disturb it. That's what's possible when you stop treating your mind like something you're stuck with and start treating it like something you can build. When you stop hoping you'll feel different someday and start constructing the architecture that makes feeling different inevitable. So I'm going to ask you the question Musashi would ask if he were here. What are you building? Not what do you want, not what do you hope for, not what you wish would happen. What are you actively constructing in your mind right now? Because whatever it is, that's the fortress you'll have when the pressure comes. If you're building on false ground, your fortress will collapse. If you're training rigidity instead of water, your fortress will shatter. If you're scattering your attention instead of training fire, your fortress will be weak. If you're refusing to study other winds, your fortress will have blind spots. And if you never reach void, your fortress will become your prison. But if you do this work, if you commit to building your mind with the same intensity Musashi brought to every duel, then you won't just have an unshakable fortress. You'll become one. Subscribe to this channel right now if you haven't already, because we're just getting started. Turn on that notification bell so you don't miss a single video, because every video I release is designed to give you one more tool, one more principle, one more layer of construction. And then do this for me. Go to the comments right now and tell me which ring you're starting with. Say, I'm starting with ground because, or I'm starting with water because, or whichever ring called to you most strongly in this video. And then tell me one specific thing you're going to do in the next 48 hours to begin that construction. Not a vague intention, a specific action. Because that's how fortresses are built. Not with wishes, but with bricks. One at a time. Starting now. I'll see you in the next video. Now go build something unbreakable.